Okie dokie. In this next video, we're going to talk about while loops. So far in this curriculum, we've used for loops exclusively, and while loops are just a different way to do the same thing. Ultimately, anything you can do with a for loop, you can do with a while loop, and vice versa. It's just they're a little easier to understand and a little better for different tasks, I guess I'll call them. But really, if you're really comfortable with for loops, you never need to use a while loop. And similarly, if you're really comfortable with while loops, you never need to use a for loop. But like I said, they just kind of naturally fit a little better as one way or another. So let's make a while loop. And actually, didn't I just have one where I was looking for for a user to input a digit? I think that's a really good example of how to use a while loop. Well, let's start with a really simple first while loop. So if you want to make a while loop that's kind of like a for loop, but a little bit messier, you can do it this way. You can start with your counting variable. So in our for loops, we'll normally see for I in range, blah, blah, blah. If you want to make a while loop this way, kind of like iterating and counting up, you can do it using an I and a counter. It's just going to be a little weird and messy. So I can start by setting an I variable to 0. And then I can say while I is less than 10, I will do some stuff. So then maybe I can just print out I, and then I will say I plus equals 1. So here's kind of the most basic example of a while loop that you might use. The way a while loop works, it's kind of like for. You say, hey, while, I'm starting a while loop. Then in the parentheses to the right of the while, you put some condition. Maybe this is closer to an if, actually, than a for loop in terms of how it looks. If this condition is true, we will enter the while loop. And you know that you're in the while loop if you're below it and indented like lines 4 and 5. And if that condition was true, well, you'll run the entire while loop. Everything inside the while loop will run from top to bottom. So now we're going to print I, right? Because I was 0. 0 is less than 10, so we're going to enter that while loop. We'll print out whatever I's current value is. And then at the end here, I'm also saying I plus equals 1. A very big issue with while loops that are harder to do with for loops is you can create a situation where you never escape your while loop unless you're careful about your condition on top and then something that you're doing inside, right? Unless you want this to loop forever and never escape, you need to have something inside of the while loop that's going to change part of the condition up here, change usually a variable on the left, to make sure that eventually we will escape this while loop. And so that's what I'm doing here is in a for loop, it kind of automatically counts up to the next one. In the while loop, you have to put that in yourself. So if we run this now, we can see that it's going to print out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. And let's think about what happens after I print 9. So it printed all those, it didn't print 10. Because I'll print, when I is 9, I'll print 9. Then I set I equal to itself plus 1. I add 1 to it, so now I is 10. Well, I jump back up to the top of my while loop. 10 is not less than 10, which means that this condition over here is false. So we'll skip the while loop. We've now exited the while loop, and we're done. And that's kind of the basic first introduction to a while loop over here. Now, this is kind of modeling how you would do a for I in range and then, 10, right? And this will do the exact same thing as that. For loops tend to be better I think they tend to be better for something like this because they already increment by themselves. They add the 1 every single time, or you can make them step by different amounts. They do that automatically, which is kind of nice. They're also really good for running through lists or groups, I guess. We haven't officially talked about lists yet. We're not up to Unit 10. While loops are kind of nice for checking to see if a thing has happened yet. And it's not necessarily counting up, and it's not necessarily going through everything in a list, but while loops do kind of shine when there's one thing. You just got to be like, did that thing happen yet? And if it didn't, or if it did, we'll either stop or keep going depending on our condition. So actually in the last video, we had an example where we said, okay, number. And then we said app.getText input, please input a number. So we're asking the user for a number. And here's an example of like the idea that I said, like this is what whiles can be really good for, is now that I got a number, or now that I got something that the user input, I want to make sure that they actually input a number before I go on to the next part. And maybe I can add the canvas in here, stop using all the print stuff. Let's say x coordinate. And now we're going to check, all right, while the x coordinate dot is digit, so we want it to be a digit. So we're going to say while the x coordinate is not a digit, that means, right? Because you can just say not something. So we're going to be looping this while the x coordinate is not a digit. So as long as it isn't a digit, this will end up becoming true. And then we'll go into the while loop. We want to keep asking, be like, hey, I really need a number though. And we'll just keep asking it over and over if they type in any letters or symbols or stuff like that until we just get a number. So while we're not a digit, what we're going to do is say, hey, x coordinate, and maybe we should make this an app.x coordinate just to make sure we're not having to worry about local or global variables, which we still haven't really talked about too much in this course. I'm going to set x coordinate equal to app.getText input. Please actually input a number this time. And then maybe at the end, what we can do is once they've actually input a number, I can create a circle at coordinates int, because we're getting it as a string by default, even though we know if it's made it past this while loop that it is a digit, but we need to still convert it from a string to an int. App.x coordinate, and then 200, and we'll make it a radius 30, fill equals red. Alrighty, let's see what happens here. So they're asking us to please input a number, and if I input 43, it works. Because since it was a digit, 43 was a digit, this came out, the part that I've highlighted now came out true. But then if I say not true, well, that turns this part to false. And once the stuff inside of a while condition is false, we skip the while. But the idea is now, if some user is trying to input some bad thing where they say, ha ha ha, I'm going to type in 42 and be a smart guy, it's going to be like, hey, please actually input a number this time. I can be like, a number this time, and it's not going to put up with our garbage. And I'll be like, okay, fine, I'll put an actual number in. And once I put a number in, because it is a digit and we don't enter this loop when we only enter the loop when it's true, since it was a digit and we say not is a digit, we'll skip the while loop, we'll make the circle. My explanation might be kind of weird, but just maybe I'll draw a little comment to maybe make it a little bit better so that you're not getting confused by how this like kind of double negative sort of thing works, right? So let's say user input, I don't know, 42, right? This is what they input. So I'm going to check, well, is this a digit? This is not a digit. So we end up having not false. But not false gets converted to, ultimately, true. And if whatever is in here is true, we then enter the while loop, which is like, hey, wise guy, can you actually input a number? Let's see what happens if they input an actual number. They input 42. Well, 42 is a digit, right? app.coordx, if it's 42, even in quotes, it is a digit. So then we end up getting, if we, hold on to this not here, we end up getting not true, and not true gets converted to false. And then when the inside of a while condition is false, we skip it So we don't need to get input from the user anymore. And we know that we have a digit. We can draw a circle. So yeah, that's a little introduction to while loops for you. Big thing to pay attention to is if you're doing a counting while loop, you have to make sure that you are changing the variable that's, going every time, so that changing the variable you're checking every time. So for example, we had at the beginning, I is less than 10. You have to make sure inside of your while that you do something to the I so that you'll end up leaving the loop. But ultimately, I do think for loops are kind of your best bet unless you have a situation where you're checking, hey, as long as this input isn't good, or as long as the input is good, we'll keep going. Or, while this thing is hitting that thing, we'll keep a message up or a different animation up, right? Like while this object is hitting that object, we'll keep like a red flash on the screen or something like that. That's what while loops are good for. Otherwise, I kind of recommend skipping a fors because we've already been kind of used to them, and they're kind of nice. For loops are kind of nice. All right, peace out. Hopefully you got something out of this, and on to Unit 10.